in Chile, that's where I had my strongest experience, I think, as a missionary. First of all, after a few months of living at our center house, which is a great place, built by Paul Amen, by the way, or purchased by this Paul Amen. Somehow I kept following him around. Paul Amen. I wasn't meeting anybody. I said, I came to here because I wanted to be with the people. And the only person I really knew was the gardener who took care of the little plaza near our house. I said, I didn't come to Chile for this. So I asked for permission to go live in our parish. I was in theology. I was studying at the Catholic University. And Father Jim Bender and the later Father Don Tiemann was superior at the time and gave me permission to live in Santo Domingo Parish. And there I lived with Father Bernie Mars, Father Ambrose Langridge, and Father Leo Herber. And we took up residence there. And a few months later, there was a big earthquake in Chile, and the parish house was damaged. And the other guys wanted to go to the center house. And I said, I just left there. I'm not going back there. So I asked permission, and our superiors were very flexible in those days. And I said, I would like to live in the apartments there with the people. These are apartment house complex put up for the working class people in Santiago. And part of our parish had these big blocks of apartments. I was given permission. I rented an apartment. I rented a room first in another apartment. And finally, Father Bernie Morris and I came together, and we lived together in two different little apartments over the years. But that was, for me, a very important choice. Become with the people. You know, we hear Pope Francis talk about that we should smell like sheep, you know. Well, that was the idea. I wanted to be out there with the people. I didn't want to live in an isolated world. And so we lived with the people, we worked with them, we helped put in sidewalks with them, we helped build a community center with them, and we just shared their life as I studied theology and at the same time began to work in pastoral ministry. And that, for me, was when my whole vision of church began to broaden. That's where I really began to see the church in a different way. Because at that time, after the Vatican Council, there was Medellin, the Latin American bishops had a meeting, and they chose to emphasize the importance of forming Christian-based communities, small faith communities which would share the gospel, pray together, and form church. I was very much involved in that and visited every home in the area. One by one, I would go house to house. And after a first moment of hesitation, because in those days, you know, I was only 22 years old, with, blue jeans, cut-off blue jeans. And after they looked at me, I said, I'm a seminarian here, and I'm in charge of this section of the parish. They would look me up and down, and first I thought I might be a Mormon missionary, I said, no, I'm not a Mormon missionary. I'm Catholic priest or a seminary student. So anyway, they welcomed me, and I really felt at home with them. We formed Christian-based communities, and that for me was a very beautiful experience because there we were, maybe 7 or 8 people, a couple married couples and another person or two, and we would sit and read the Bible. Now, these were people, some of whom were analphabeto. They didn't know how to read and write, illiterate, but they would read we would read the Bible, and they would explain how they heard that and how God spoke to them through that word, and began to really learn how to connect faith with lived experiences. For me, that was a learning. I learned more with them than I did in the university. In fact, the university profs I used to drive them a little crazy because I was so imbued with this work with the lay Christian-based communities. I would take all these questions to class, and the profs would give these, and then I'd say, yes, Barry, how do you explain this, what you just said to the people that I'm working with? And they used to get mad. Oh, you're always asked those kind of questions. You're going to have to figure that out yourself someday. Well, yeah. But that's what, because I was taking real life questions to theology and not the other way around. And it was a really beautiful experience, and I learned to live church in a different way. These were people who then, little by little, really became so taken up with their faith that they began to assume the administration, the catechesis, the preparation of the sacraments, works of solidarity with the poor. And we eventually even made a mission team of these lay people to go out to other parishes to do mission with them. This was a church alive and vibrant, and it changed my whole vision of what it is to be church and the importance of the lay people in the church. They were church. I was part of that with them. And together we walked, together we discovered. These Christian-based communities, it wasn't, just all, chummy, friendly stuff. We were living in times, Tom knows very well, in very conflicted times. It was during the presidency of Salvador Allende, a socialist, and all the upheavals in the country, the military coup in which Allende died and many other people disappeared and were killed. The country was polarized, and this polarization also came into the Christian-based communities. I mean, in those little Christian communities we didn't all think on the same lines, but there was something stronger than our differences, and it was the love of Christ. It was our desire to try to live the gospel message, and that's what kept us together. It wasn't because we all thought along the same lines, but because we all had one thing in common, and that was Jesus Christ. That was the basis of our communion together. And I think that's a lesson very important for all of us in times when, our church and our society is so polarized. That we can be one, we can live together, we can love each other even with our differences. It's not like we're all alike, we all have to think alike, but we all love Jesus, and Jesus is the foundation, and that's number one for us. All the rest is secondary. Isn't that what Pope Francis is also calling us to? He keeps calling us back to Jesus, back to Jesus, back to the basics. All the rest of the stuff, that'll come along. But Jesus Christ and the gospel. And that's something I learned in Chile with the Christian-based communities and how to be evangelized by them. Pope Francis says, when he talks about his life, he says, I really learned a lot from the poor. Well, I can certainly identify with that too. I learned an awful lot from the poor. And in the end, I felt they were doing more to evangelize me than I was to evangelizing them. They taught me more about what it means to live the gospel than I was able to teach them. Everyone is called to be a missionary. As Christians, we need to open our hearts to the needs of others and to respond to those needs. We are all missionaries. We're all in this together. Here the lay people, priests, brothers, all of us are called to live the gospel and to continue the mission of Jesus, which is God's mission. Often, we suffer what is sometimes called, the Vatican Council called, one of the greatest sins is the separation of faith from life. Like we compartmentalize faith. We have these beliefs, but then our everyday lives might go in another direction. No. Faith and life must come together. I remember one time in Guatemala, I was visiting with the parish priest, a rich landowner who had this big coffee plantation, and the pastor was trying to make her see that the 75 cents a day that the workers were earning was not quite just enough, and she just was having a hard time with that. She said, well, what more do they want? They're working 12 hours a day for 75 cents a day, living in little huts, mud huts and thatched roofs. Their children never went to school. What more do they want? A devout Catholic, living supposedly her faith, but yet the divorce between what she believed and life, concern for others. And Pope Francis again calls us. He says, let's stop looking at our belly buttons all the time and look out there. Out there, he keeps saying. You know how the Pope talks, he says, get out, get out, get out of our places, our sacristies, and go to the encounter of the people, because our faith calls us to that. As Christian disciples, we are missionaries. All of us are called to mission.